Well, there was a man who was on trial for purse snatching, and his defending attorney argued that there was no solid evidence that the man had stolen anything. So the prosecutor called up the victim, and she pointed straight at the defendant and said, "That's the man who stole my purse. I'd recognize his face anywhere." And the defendant jumped up and he said, "You're lying, lady. I was wearing a mask. You never even saw my face." But it was no laughing matter when Danny Edward Scott Castelnuovo was arrested in 1997 for impersonating a police officer. He had been flashing a police badge to gain entrance into people's homes so he could steal from them. And in the book, You've Got to Read This Book, 55 people tell the story of the book that changed their life. Danny writes that worst of all, he was stealing just for the sheer thrill of it. But after his arrest, he and his family lost most of their possessions, including their 4-bedroom house and their car. Danny went to the Los Angeles County Jail. He lost his relationship with the 2 people he loved the most, his wife and daughter. He despaired. But the second day that he was in jail, a man gave him a book, Chicken Soup for the Prisoner's Soul. Danny read it cover to cover scores of times until he could recite stories from memory. Then one day, another prisoner asked Danny to read the stories to him. He came to know this man as Old Man Sam. So as he read, at one point he looked up to see deep emotions reflected in Old Man Sam's eyes. This started a chain reaction, which led to Danny crying along with Sam. He felt a wonderful release. It was a tremendous feeling to share so deeply with another. Danny writes, "A great change took place in my heart at that moment. I felt a fulfilling happiness and a kind of peace surrounded my spirit." So Sam rounded up some of his buddies. Danny started reading to them. And soon the circle, as it came to be called, had 15 members. Soon as he was reading to these men, Danny found himself crying right along with those men too. He read to them for 2 hours a day. It was their escape from the seething world of madness and hatred around them. But then one day, Danny saw a gang of jail bullies stealing all the newly distributed groceries and items from the members of the circle and others. Sam came back with a red, hand-shaped mark on his face where someone had slapped him. Danny was furious. In that moment, Danny realized what an awful time the people he'd robbed must have had. Their homes invaded, their belongings stolen. The full extent of what he'd done hit him for the first time. So he ran and told on the bullies. The bullies got busted, and the victims got transferred to safer housing. But late that night, 9 thugs had a talk with Danny. When they were done, he had a broken right hand, fractured wrist, shattered cheekbone, and a broken nose. But through all the pain, he felt a huge smile in his heart. So Danny, after that, was also reassigned housing where he rejoined the circle. One day during circle time, someone transferred into the dorm. It was the leader of the gang of thugs who'd broken his bones. So Danny was terrified. The mountain of a man walked right up to the circle and looked into Danny's eyes for what seemed like forever. Finally, the huge man said, "It took a lot of courage to do what you did. Do you mind if I join the circle?" Danny was shocked, not only because he wanted to join, but because Danny was willing to let him. So he started reading. The newcomer seemed to be carrying some great burden until finally he stood up and said, "Name's Alan. I'm sorry for hurting all of you and stealing from you." Then Alan gave each of them a hug. Danny writes, "The way he stood up and said he was sorry helped all of us, especially me. In the months that followed, I began mailing apology letters to my victims. in those letters, I wrote a little about what had happened to me in the Los Angeles County Jail and how it had led me to send my apologies. So Danny is one of our teachers today because Danny had an awakening experience in which he woke up to a much greater realization of his own divine nature. And he discovered its ability to heal and transform not only his own life, but others as well. In this case, he woke up to an awareness of his divine connection to, or oneness with, all people. Now, as we all know, this divine nature, or Christ nature, is within each of us. We all have that same ability to experience fulfilling happiness and peace which surrounds our spirit at all times. Now, in unity, this is our second principle. Human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ spirit within. Their very essence is of God. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Now that means it's there within you right now. It's there all the time. All the majesty, all the transcendent joy of the kingdom of heaven is within you right now. So now if the kingdom's here, why is it that most of the time we're not fully experiencing it? I mean, yes, we experience portions of it, at least at times. But now let's look at Danny. He was so cut off from awareness of his own divine nature that he was stealing from people's homes just for the sheer thrill of it. Now, obviously, most of us aren't like that, but we do sometimes experience sadness, pain, anger, loneliness, and resentments. So I'd like to read a little bit of scripture of the Garden of Eden story. This is from Genesis 17:18. And to the man God said, because you have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And Genesis 24, he drove out the man and the woman, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed a cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. Now in unity, we interpret Scripture metaphysically, so now how could we interpret this story? Well, it speaks of being in a heavenly place where everything one needs is provided for you, and then being kicked out of that heavenly existence into an experience of suffering. So now there's many ways to look at this, but some people have seen this as something that can accompany what happens when we enter into this physical world. Now I'd like everyone to please try to imagine, if you can, what it must have been like for you when you were preparing to enter into the physical world. So at that point you were in the non-physical world. You didn't have a physical body to take care of. You didn't have a body that you had to feed and clothe and shelter and protect from harm. I mean, these are purely physical needs. They only apply to a physical body. So you could not be harmed in any way. You were invulnerable. In fact, not even kryptonite could harm you. Superman is a wuss compared to you living in the non-physical. So of course there's no fear. There was never any experience of separation from your good, not even a subjective experience of separation. And you didn't have to worry, and you didn't even feel separate from other beings. Okay, so you didn't have to worry about physical space, which separates us. You didn't have to worry about words which travel through physical air and can be misheard or misinterpreted. There's no air in the non-physical. In the non-physical, we communicate mind to mind. There's no misinterpretation. And most importantly, in the non-physical, we have no experience of feeling separate from the divine presence within us, what in unity we call the Christ nature, because there's nothing there to distract us from our true nature. When fully realized, the divine within represents perfect peace wholeness and bliss. We know this because some people here have fully realized their divine nature here on earth. They tell us it's the exact same divine nature, divine presence that's in each and every one of us. So clearly, as we prepare to enter into this world, we are in heaven. We are in kingdom of heaven consciousness. So then we enter into the physical world. For traditional birth, studies show that the birth process is just as painful for the baby as for the mother. And I'm talking about natural childbirth, no drugs. So it's like a huge wake-up call. Like, hello, now you're in a place where there is pain and you can be harmed, so you'd better prepare yourself. And then we get here and suddenly we experience separation from our good. We are physically separate from the food that we need to survive. We're separate from the clothing and shelter we need. As an adult, I'm sometimes painfully aware that I'm separate from my car keys. And there's the possibility we can be harmed here. And we're also separate from other people in a physical sense. Now I'm stuck in my physical body. You're stuck in yours. And as infants, we're completely dependent on caregivers in order to survive. Caregivers who are not necessarily always there when we want them. So as part of the separation from others, we have the experience of loneliness sometimes. Loneliness was unknown to us in the non-physical. So no wonder Edgar Cayce once said, if people could remember how anxious they were right before they entered into this world, they wouldn't be so scared to leave it. But now, please don't hear me saying that the non-physical world is better than ours. No, it is easier than our world, yes, but easier is not always better. It is precisely because our world has many challenges in it that it is so conducive to growth. We come here as an enormous educational opportunity to go through many transformative experiences in a relatively short time. So here in the physical world, we receive very necessary training from our caregivers. They teach us right from wrong. In some fashion, we are rewarded for some behavior and punished for other. Even if it's just approval and disapproval, these can be very powerful reward and punishment techniques. And obviously, this is absolutely necessary for our survival. We have to learn that we cannot run out into speeding traffic. If we had to learn that from trial and error, a lot of us wouldn't make it, would we? So we have to learn what's right and what's wrong, what's good and bad. But wait, the Garden of Eden story said that Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden because they ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. I read that and I was like, what? I thought the knowledge of good and evil was a good thing. Why is that a bad thing? But when we first enter into this physical world, our soul does not think in terms of good and bad, good and evil. We come from somewhere where everything is good. Everything is in a state of wholeness all the time. So then we come here and we experience rewards and punishments. And what we experience is that our worthiness is dependent on doing certain things and also on not doing certain things. So now we have conditional worthiness. We have to earn worthiness. And we have to keep earning it over and over, day by day. It's not enough that I bathed and put on clothes thousands of times before. I had to do it again today. And this is radically different than what we experienced on the other side, where we could not be separated from our wholeness. This fact that we have to keep earning wholeness over and over suggests that now we're coming from a basic stance of unwholeness, or we could say conditional wholeness. regardless of what our days look like, there's still a lot of things that we don't have a lot of choice about. When you're driving, you have to obey certain rules, or you'll lose your license, or possibly end up a pancake. But because we're coming from this basic stance of unwholeness or conditional wholeness, we also experience the greatest separation of all. We become separated from true awareness of our own divine nature. Now we lose that constant fullness of bliss and peace. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that we are actually separated from our divine nature. That's impossible. But we largely lose our immediate awareness of it. So we have, in a metaphysical sense, been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Now, some of you may be wondering, what about Unity's first principle, which is also our statement of being? There's only one presence and one power in this community, in our lives, and in the universe, God, the good omnipotence. Now, on our website, the first principle is stated as, God is the source and creator of all. There's no other enduring power. God is good and present everywhere. But all this talk about the knowledge of good and evil suggests two powers, good and evil. So how do we reconcile this idea of two powers with the idea that there's only one presence and one power? Can we reconcile them, or is everything I've been talking about complete bunk? Good, I was afraid people were going to shout out, it's bunk! Well, the answer to this conundrum is that our statement of being is talking about the spiritual level of reality from which everything comes. At the spiritual level, we are all part of the same thing. We're connected. At the physical level, we are separate. We're not joined at the hip. So the idea that there are two powers, good and evil, is something that only makes sense in the physical, practical realm. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there are certain things we need, such as our survival needs. So in this physical, practical sense, it is good when we meet our survival needs. Now, you could say that that's just a human preference to survive, and who are we to say that it's good or bad? You say, when we get a larger perspective on the events, such as perhaps after we die, we might, completely change our view on its goodness, or its badness, or its neutrality. And you're absolutely right from the spiritual perspective. But from the physical, practical point of view, we all go to considerable trouble to ensure our survival. None of us would be here if we didn't. And likewise, there are certain things that we absolutely avoid. We don't let our children run out into speeding traffic. Actually, I should check, is there anyone who's okay with letting children run out into speeding traffic? Just raise, no one, okay. So we're all on the same page. There are certain things that we avoid. But at the same time, our soul still knows that it cannot be harmed. One way or another, each of us, will pass from this world and we'll find that we're fine. And it's precisely because our soul and our divine nature knows it cannot be harmed that for most of us, at least, we have to partially forget our divine nature. We have to identify with our body and take care of our body. This focus on the body is necessary for us to learn the myriad skills required to function as a human being. So one of my favorite spiritual teachers is Ram Dass. He talks about how in order to wake up spiritually, we need to let go of our identification with ourselves as bodies. But that doesn't mean that we give up the human roles we have adopted. We keep performing our daily roles, or at least the more necessary ones, while at the same time letting go of our identification with ourselves as bodies. So Ram Dass says that you have to become somebody before you can become nobody. By becoming somebody, he means as you grow up, you have to learn the day in, day out skills that you will need and the roles that you will play as a human being. By becoming nobody, He means we let go of our identification with ourselves just as bodies, which is necessary to become as identified with the divine as you are with your body. This divine is the same divine in me, you, the building, the air. When I'm as identified with the divine as I am with my body, I feel my fundamental connection with all and with everything. So I'm not just this guy you see in front of you. I'm everywhere and everyone. So when this happens, we hold on to all the things we've learned about how to function well as a human being, but we are also filled with that constant bliss and peace, which is our true nature. So we see that these two ideas, on the one hand that there's only one power, and on the other hand that there's two powers, good and evil, coexist quite smoothly. When Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is within you, or at hand, he was trying to remind us of that kingdom of heaven consciousness, which most of us, to some degree, have lost touch with. So like Danny, we can feel that fulfilling happiness and that peace surrounding our spirit when we tap into our divine connection. We're not here to just stop doing our human life. No, we're here to incorporate our adult human lives into a return to kingdom of heaven consciousness. In other words, we are here to bring heaven to earth. No pressure or anything, guys. And each of us has already learned a lot about how to do that. In fact, I often feel some heaven right here in this room, and we shall all continue to learn. So thank you very much.